Hello everyone. Okay, another video. This is the second game in the amateur work tournament that I'm playing in. My opponent's rating was probably, they're given around 800, so it's a very beginner amateur level. But enjoying the game, and I'll enjoy the social playing over the board. It's fun to play and meet new people. So this is my game today. I'll run you guys through what happened and try and find some tips for you guys. So I played the knight out, King's Indian attack. This is often a favourite opening when I'm not sure what opening to use. I'll play this one. Very easy, systematic. Doesn't really matter as much what your opponent does because you can play it against most openings and you get a couple of moves in without having to really start calculating it. Plus it's very flexible. Okay. What's the problem with this move? My opponent's launched an attack. It's probably, to be honest, it's a bit early. She didn't have her other pieces developed yet, so it's a bit early to have an attack, especially when I haven't made any, I haven't held back on my development. I've got my knight out, my bishop out, and I've castled. So I've followed all the opening rules of development, moving each piece once. In this case, there's no fork or anything, so it's not advised to move the same piece twice in the opening until you have other pieces to reinforce it. Imagine if this bishop was here. Okay, that might be a decent move because you've got a bishop and a knight attacking a sensitive point, forcing me to either defend by blocking or the knight to the edge to defend. So you're forcing me to make a move that I might not have wanted to make. But in this case, the bishop hasn't been developed. So the knight moving here, all that does is present me with a target for an attack. So my move was, I opened up my queen. I'm eyeing this check at some point and potentially taking the knight. I know it's defended at the moment by the bishop. But who knows? If my opponent were to put their knight in front of the bishop for some reason, then that check could be a potential. So nothing winning yet, but this also has a purpose. This move here also has a purpose of, I want to exchange in the center to weaken black's center. So my bishop from long range, followed with my knight, I've got a point of attack in the center here that I can start breaking down the center and opening up lines. When should you exchange? Well, my king's safe, opponent's her king was in the center. As a rule of thumb, you could look to exchange pawns and open up the position to expose the king. So that's a general strategy moving forward. My opponent anticipates the check and prevents it, and develops a piece, so that's not too bad. I develop a piece and put pressure on the center, like I said. This is going to be a point of attack. My opponent takes the free pawn. Now, did I gambit that pawn? Well, kind of. I gave it up. Did I calculate every possible way to get it back? No, I didn't. But what I know is that when my opponent is wasting a lot of moves, and look at her king side, nothing's developed. My opponent might be planning to bring the queen out, for example, and castle queenside. If that's the case, well, thank you for taking my pawn and opening up my bishop to the queenside and potentially exposing yourself to an attack. So I feel like I can win the pawn back, and I attempt to do so. But my main purpose of sacrificing was to gain a lead in development. So now I bring my knight up, which is threatening the pawn. My opponent actually can't really defend the pawn. If my opponent tries to defend the pawn with another pawn, look at my bishop, it's been opened up and the rook goes. So in this case, without having to think, I pretty much get my pawn back. And as a result, I end up with a really good bishop here and a strong knight. My opponent retreats because this pawn was also threatened. So notice how, at the 800 level, people are moving the same piece twice. This piece has moved forward and back. The knight's moved up, and eventually it's going to have to move back because it's in a position where I can attack it. And notice I have moved the same piece twice, but the difference between me moving my piece forward compared to moving the knight forward is I'm coordinating with my bishop to do an attack at the same time, and I'm attacking something specific, which is a pawn here. So I know I'm also breaking the rules because I haven't developed this bishop, but I want to show you guys when do you break the rules and when do you develop. So I'm only doing it this time because I have a specific reason. I decided to chase the knight back. So I could take the pawn, but what's more important? More important is to see if I can get anything more out of the position. So you'll notice this square here is covered by my knight and by my bishop. So knight retreating to here, I would end up, let's play this out. If the knight retreated to here, I would go take, check, which is a fork, winning the exchange and being ahead in material. Then I'd probably follow up with, say, something like pawn up, get my bishop out. My opponent's still way behind in development. You may be worried about later a sneaky, I'll just give an example. Something like, say get the bishop out, something like there, going for checkmate. I've always got, in this case, I can look to do some other sort of attacks. I can go here because on one hand I can always block the attack, give back the exchange if I had to, but I feel like once my opponent moves the bishop away, I've got a knight, I've got a rook ready to come in. This check's pretty awkward. It's counterattack if the king moves over to the d file. I'm going to bring my rook out of danger from the bishop with a check, followed by either knight up to the center, blocking, or the pawn up. So if the king moves over, I've either got knight up or I can bring pawn up. I can always defend the threat on g2. It's very simple in this case. I know in some cases it's scary, but in this case I feel like my leading development would protect me. So that forces my opponent to play what she did, which is knight to d5, back to the center. Now I decide to bring my queen out into the attack, and my opponent blocks the check and take with the queen instead of with a knight. I felt like my knight was better positioned on e5, threatening the potential square on f7 and restricting the pieces rather than moving the knight and having the queen still here. So now another piece out. My plan now is to go, I guess, pawn up, bring the bishop out, bring the rooks into the center, and have a nice strong center, rooks behind it, bishop out, and then play from there. So no immediate win or anything. It's not winning. It's just a better position overall because I've got so many pieces out. I've got two knights, bishop, castling counts as a piece out, and a queen. And my opponent just has one knight. So all her pieces are back on the starting rank. So this is why it's important to develop your pieces. You'll see soon. My opponent exchanges. I capture towards the center. Like I said, I wanted to have a nice strong center. Now my bishop can probably go here, and then I'd have the rooks behind it. And then my idea was to open up the center with a pawn. I hope you guys can visualize all of that. So this is long-term planning. When you can't see immediate wins, you think of long-term planning. And then how do I know to plan like that? Well, I know to put my rooks in the center because fundamentals in chess, you want to control the center. Even more reason to control the center. My opponent hasn't really claimed much stake in the center. Their pawns are back on the 6th rank. So I have an easy way to take the center. So why not take it? I can worry about the specific attacking patterns later. I know that if I get the center first, control it really well, put the rooks behind, get that sort of a setup, that's at least the next 10 moves covered for me, unless something happens. And then I've got a plan going forward. So this is a 10-minute game, so you need to have a quick plan of what you're going to do. Now, I just told you my plan. Do I stick to my plan? Now that my opponent's made this move, no. You have to adjust. My opponent has just made a serious mistake, which gives me winning material advantage. So I forget that plan I just said in my head, because my opponent has weakened this square here again, which is forking king and rook in the attempt to attack my queen. Notice again, this is not a developing move. It's a one-move threat to my queen, which people need to learn. You need to get your knights out, you need to get your bishops out, you need a castle, you need to get all your pieces working together. So queen takes pawn. So now I'm in a position to take advantage of a mistake. And then I win the rook. Okay, now we've entered another phase. It's kind of like towards an end game. There's no queens on. There's going to be, looks like no checkmating attack. My opponent moved the bishop back. So how do I proceed from here? Again, like in the last game, I have a winning material advantage. What's a good way to try and win the game quickly? You don't want to take all day. It's a 10-minute game. You don't want to accidentally lose on time because you're trying to find the perfect win. So what's a simple way to win? Well, again, even in this situation, develop your pieces. My bishop's not developed, this rook's not developed, and this rook's not developed. Bishop would classify as being developed even though it's on the other side of the board, and the knight's still in a strong position in the center. So what's the easiest piece to develop? Well, I've got a lot of pawns here, so to develop this rook is going to take some time. To develop this bishop, I could play pawn up in the center and develop the bishop out. However, I'm thinking, what's the bishop going to do? Having it developed is nice, and eventually it would lead me to being able to attack something, but at this stage, while my opponent is undeveloped, I decided that I'd rather develop this rook here. I could win a pawn by going check and taking the pawn, but winning a pawn at this stage doesn't matter when you're up a rook. What matters now is just opening lines, getting all my rooks, getting my pieces into the attack. So I played a4, wanting to exchange and then open up the rook to come in and potentially come to the 7th rank and coordinate with my knight and bishop to create some sort of checkmating attack. So just because your queen's off doesn't mean you can't do a checkmating attack. My opponent saw this and chased my knight away and took the pawn. So now, happy. I win a pawn anyway, but my opponent's 7th rank has been exposed. So this is going to be good for me later when I have my rook down. So bishop down, rook down. G5. Again, not developing pieces. So my opponent, if you take anything from your game, it's make sure that you really, next time, you develop your pieces. I know you're behind a rook, but still it's good practice. Get your knight out, get your bishop out, maybe bring your knight to a good square. So you could have brought the knight here to here, for example, bishop up, and castled. Just get into that practice of doing that. Okay. Now I push this pawn up. So I've got two plans. I've got one plan, get a queen like in my first game. Just go for a queen. It's going to be very difficult for my opponent to stop this with only one bishop. Second plan, bring the bishop out. Now that this diagonal is weakened, put it on a strong square, and if the knight moves, I want to take the bishop in, and then I can bring my knight back and set up a checkmating pattern. So if my bishop was, let's get rid of these arrows. If you visualize a few moves ahead, if this bishop were on this square and this knight were on this square, you'd have this square covered by the bishop, this square is covered by the knight, and then all I need to do is checkmate, bring a rook to the end. So think of patterns where you can do two things at once. Bring the bishop out and set up a checkmate, as well as going for a queen. Opponent, again, move the same piece again. It's like these pieces don't exist. So I continue with my development. See, it's nice, slow and steady. I don't need to rush and checkmate in 2 moves. Slow and steady. Open up my rook. You can see the pawn's gone up. Bring out the bishop. So I'm untangling my pieces. Now my bishop's putting pressure. Now my opponent can't move the knight, even if they wanted to. Well, if they did, they'd lose another pawn and set up the checkmate. So now I'm restricting their knight, which means the rook can't move. So they're being tied down. That's a good move in the situation as it restricts my bishop. However, I have switching to another plan now. Bishop here. What's the point of that move? Doesn't really do anything. Well, what it does is allows me to bring this other rook into the attack. So I want to come, I had a plan to bring the rook down. So my plan of bringing the bishop and knight here to restrict has been stopped. Plan B. I've got another rook, bring my other rook over, down and checkmate. And the reason the bishop's good here as well is it opens the file, but also if the king ever moves across, it allows me to check, and then the king has to go back, and then I can bring the rook down and take the bishop, and there's not much defense. So it's a little extra step. Opponent attacks my rook. I wanted to move my rook anyway, threatening a deadly check on b8. So I'm slowly improving all my pieces. Notice I haven't moved this bishop yet, because there's been no need to. My opponent threatens a knight, and then I deliver the check on the back rank. Now you can see the dangers of having everything undeveloped. If my opponent were castled here, she would have lasted a bit longer. But in this case, it was a simple checkmate. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this game, and I'll see you for round 3.